everyone, it's Jill Foster here with one in a series of several videos featuring Penny Black's newest scenic stamps. And in today's video I will be featuring this gorgeous scene and cling stamp called Wanderlust. And I just love creating cards with these scenic stamps. It's amazing all of the different looks you can give them. And you can do lots of really great techniques just with this one stamp. So in today's video I'm going to show you two different techniques, a watercolor technique as seen there, or an ink blending technique. So no matter what supplies you have on hand or what you prefer, you'll have some great ideas on how to use this stamp. So before we begin stamping, I did want to mention there will be a full supply list at the very end of the video up on screen. So if you want to check out any of the stamps, product numbers, names, inks, anything I use in the video, just hit pause at that time and it'll show those for both of the cards. So to begin, we're going to do the ink blending technique. And for both of these cards that I'm creating today, I am working in the Misty Stamp Positioning tool. And this is a really important tool for these techniques because it gives you lots of time and lots of opportunities to put lots of different layers of color onto your stamp. So I'm working on smooth white cardstock and I'm inking my stamp using the miniature archival inks, and I've chosen these inks because I like the very small size. I'm also going to use some Arteza real brush pens to work on even smaller areas. So I put a lighter layer of green onto those trees, and then on just one side here I'm adding a darker layer just on one side of the tree, and this automatically adds some shading. Now for this ink blending technique, you can really use any inks, markers that you have on hand. The only thing I would not recommend is alcohol-based markers because they dry on your stamp and you don't have much time really, you can't really stamp with them on there. But because at the very end of our stamping we're going to seal these inks in with some embossing, and you'll see that at the end and it'll make more sense, you can really use whatever you have on hand. What I like is inks with a mini size, which allow you to just kind of turn them on their side and apply those colors exactly where you want them. And then your markers also allow you to do that too. It's a little bit easier to pick up the detail in the stamp with an ink pad because you have that flat surface of the ink pad when you're applying it to the image. So you just get a little bit more of a crisp look with that. That's why often I start with an ink pad where I can and then add just the shading in using the markers. So I'm moving down now over to the grasses area, and I am adding actually some yellows in there to brighten things up, and then a green. So I've used library green on the trees, some sunflower, I'm going to use leaf green, even some orange blossom, and the acorn color. And all of these colors, these ink pads, everything I'm using are, like I said, at the very end of the video in that supply list. Mostly I'm starting with my lightest colors and then adding my darker right on top. When I do this, I don't notice really any contamination of my ink pad, so I can put that yellow ink right onto the stamp and then put the green on top and without any problems. If you're worried about that though, you can clean the stamp in between your color applications. I'm going back now with just a little bit more of that yellow. And this is such a fun process to do because you can see there right before your eyes, this whole scene just starts to come to life just by stamping, inking and stamping. You don't have to do any painting. You don't have to think about the composition. That is already done for you. The perspective already done for you in the stamp. So it's just really fun. You just can play with different color combinations. You could do these for different seasons just by sort of changing up your color scheme. Here I'm just grabbing the marker to add in a little bit of darker shading right there under those trees and sort of next to the road. And in between here, and you can see where that marker tip allows you to get right in between those very small areas. Like I said, these are the Arteza Real Brush pens, and I've chosen them because I really like the colors of those, but you can use your distress markers, your Tombow markers. There's lots of different options for this. And then I thought I'm going to make these grasses over here sort of look like flowers. So I just added a touch of red up at the top. And just darkening that up by stamping it a couple of times. And again, this is sort of like your coloring of your stamp or your image, only you're doing it directly onto the stamp instead of right on your paper. Now before this next step, I'm going to clean my stamp, and I'm just using some water and a microfiber rag. And this works really well because you don't get any little fuzz left from baby wipes or anything on all that detail of the stamp. Now I'm going to pat my image with an anti-static bag so that the embossing powder we're going to use does not stick anywhere I don't want it. Now I'm inking my stamp with Versamark ink. This is just a clear sticky ink, which is what our embossing powder will stick to. I have not moved my paper or that stamp. That's really important. And probably would be fine just to stamp it once, but I just get in the habit of stamping things a couple of times just to be sure that we have really good coverage. It's a fairly large stamp and a lot of detail, so it is perfectly fine to stamp it a couple times if you're worried. Now we can remove that from our stamp positioning tool, and I'm going to sprinkle that with clear embossing powder, and then off camera I will just heat that to set that powder. And what that's going to do is seal in all of those colors that we have stamped. And I'm going to seal in, I wanted to also preserve the highlights on these trees. So I'm using a Versa marker. This is the same thing as that Versamark ink pad, only it's in a marker form. Coloring right over the trees, and then I will sprinkle that with the clear embossing powder and then heat that to set. Now we can add, after all that is set, we can add our inks right on top of this scene, and all of those colors that we've already done are going to remain really nice and vibrant. So to do my inking, I am using the Make Art Blendable Dye Inks by Wendy Vecchi. I'm also going to use some Memento inks. You can use any type of dye inks that you have on hand. You want to use a dye ink so that it can be removed or buffed off of that stamped and embossed layer that we just did. So distress inks also work really well. And I've chosen these because they're dye inks and also because I really like the colors. And I'm applying the inks with some fingertip sponge daubers. That allows me to get into just those small spaces like I did there on those hills. And right in here I want to create kind of a burst of sun coming out. So with just that small fingertip sponge dauber, I have a lot of control where I put that ink. And then I'm going to just layer those different colors, some orange blossom, some sunflower, working primarily in a circular motion and then lightening my pressure as I work my way out. And you can see now where I'm applying that ink, say for example, over the tops of those trees, they're keeping that nice green stamping. Also, that white highlight that's on those trees also remains because we colored that with the Versa marker and heat set that as well. Now for this larger area, I'm going to use a sponge, a jumbo sponge applicator. And I'm starting off of the edge of my paper and working my way on in a circular motion, taking care to try not to get that too much into that yellow area because I don't want the sky to turn green on me because those colors will mix and blend a little bit. You can use, and you can see I'll also use the Ranger ink applicator tools with the foam pad on top. I have a lot of different sponge applicators just in my stash, and I have kind of divided them up so I have one for each color and I don't have to keep tearing off the foam or switching the foam. And that's why you'll see in a lot of my videos me switching back and forth between those different sponge applicators. I think they all work really well. So that completes the inking and the scene. Now for this scene, I have stamped a sentiment from I'm just looking here, the Just Believe over on the right hand side. Those other two are just some other that I think are really great for these scenic stamps, so I included them there for you to see. And I white heat embossed that up on that left hand quarter and added a basic frame. And that completes that gorgeous scene. So now I want to show you a different technique to give this a softer sort of watercolor feel. So when stamping this, The main thing when you're choosing your inks is you want to be sure to choose inks that are archival or waterproof. So now I'm using the archival inks, and when I'm grabbing my markers, I am using the Faber-Castell Stampers Big Brush markers because those are an India ink, and once dry, they're permanent. Because when we add our watercolor on top of this, I don't want any of that stamping to start to bleed and blend. So for the first technique with the ink blending, you can really grab whatever you have on hand. For the watercolor, you just want to be sure that the inks and the markers that you're using are waterproof choices. So I find the archival inks really well for that, and these Stampers Big Brush markers are a great way to be able to add those details in. Now off camera I did the stamping with the archival inks first, just like I did on the first technique. I didn't bore you with having to watch that again, but I wanted to show you there that I did the details and the shading with those Stampers Big Brush pens. Now I have not added any embossing. I have not done anything like that here. I'm just painting now right on top of that stamping. Now this was stamped on Canson 140-pound cold press watercolor paper, and I'm painting it with my Sakura Koi Field Sketchbox watercolors. And this is so fun because this scene, because there's none of that embossing, it really looks so hand painted. It doesn't look like an outline stamp that you've colored in. When you're done, it just looks like a gorgeous hand painted scene, and it's really easy to do. Um, so I just added a touch of brown there for the road, a little bit of green up in those hills and down in this grassy area. I'm adding, while that's still wet, just dropping in a little bit darker color. These watercolors do tend to dry lighter, so you may have to go back and sort of intensify the colors or put them on a little darker than you would if they didn't dry lighter. Just playing around here with some different colors. You can use any type of watercolors that you have on hand and that you like to paint with. And I just find these scenic stamps to be so relaxing to paint, to ink, and stamp. The results are really amazing. You just feel like quite the artist when you are all done painting and stamping with them. And it's just a really nice variety. So if you're feeling like you're in a bit of a rut with your stamping or want to try something new, these stamps are so great for that. They just are refreshing to work with. You can use these cards for pretty much any occasion. They're really great for masculine cards, um, birthdays, thinking of you, travel themed cards for the summer. Here I'm just painting in the sky, dropping in some blue and then blending it out with the water on my brush. And I did speed this up quite a bit because with both techniques included in the video, I didn't want you to get too bored or be here all day, but it's very just basic painting, not any complicated blending or shading techniques are required. Now the first card that I shared with you was just slightly smaller than a 5x7, and I wanted to show you can also use these stamps for a standard A2 size card. So I cut this painted scene using the stitch nested frames you see on the left. It also would look beautiful with our new leaf stitched frames, which I'm showing you there on the right, and mounted it to a standard A2 size card after stamping just a simple sentiment over on the left hand side. I thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website and blog. And I will link all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. And stay tuned. Here are the supply list for the first card, and the second card is coming right up. Thanks for watching.